So, John, if you'll come up and read our scripture lesson, and I invite you to stand as you are able as John reads the scripture lesson.
The page we're going into the Pew Bible is 965. The time is coming, declares the Lord, when I will fulfill my gracious promise with the people of Israel and Judah. In the days and at the time, I will rise up a righteous branch of David's line, who will do what is just and right in the land. In those days, Judah will be saved, and Jerusalem will be alive in safety. And this is what he will be called: the Lord is our righteous.
Amen. This is the word of God for the people of God. You may be seated. Thank you, John.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Today we are beginning the season of Advent, and Advent is that season of 4 weeks of preparation as we prepare for Christmas. Our theme this year is Testify to Love. And over the next several weeks we'll be using that theme to talk about different aspects of what it means to prepare for this holy season. Testify to Love is actually the name of a song. How many of you remember the TV series several years ago called Touched by an Angel? Some of you remember that. Good. There was a song that was sung at the very end of that series at the closing called Testify to Love. And I can't remember if it was Naomi Judd or Ashley Judd that sang it. But one of those sang that song, and it was a song that was a part of that theme of that show. The idea that things that we do in our lives testify to the love of God around us. So that's kind of the theme that we'll be using over the next several weeks. And today our theme is Testify to Righteous Love. Now, I'm going to start out by saying that no matter where you were on September the 11th, 2001, you remember. You remember. Right? You remember where you were? The images of that day are hard to forget. These are just a few of them. We see a plane crashing into the World Trade Center. We see a plane on the ground in Pennsylvania. We see the fire trucks there before the Pentagon. And those images are hard for us to forget. Few of us ever thought that an attack on the U.S. soil would ever take place. But yet, it did. Few of us have ever seen a city in ruin, particularly one of our own cities. But that's what we saw that day. Now, other nations, other children, other adults, other youth have seen their cities obliterated by destruction, by bombings, and by rubble. But this was the first time in the United States that we had a major city under attack. And there was staggering destruction and loss of life. I don't know about you, but there are a number of images that just are indelibly printed upon my mind. Images even greater than these. Images of people leaping from the World Trade Center to their death because they knew that they would not live. September the 11th, 2001. We've all felt a little less safe since then. On that day, our nation sustained a deep wound. The destructions of cities and countries has continued across our world, and recently we have watched as there were bombings in Paris and Beirut and in Mali, and war in Syria. Cities in each of those places have endured war and the aftermath of war. Similar injuries have come across those cities, and those injuries have not only scarred the landscape, but also have scarred the spirits of the people. And pain and destruction is something that seems to be rampant in our world. Just a couple days ago, in Colorado Springs, a terrorist was assaulted the Planned Parenthood clinic in Colorado Springs. 3 people were killed. Yesterday, there was another terrorist attack in Mali when a UN peacekeeping station was attacked by rocket fire and rocket launchers. Even in our own city, even in our own community, we experience pain and destruction. There are assaults and vandalism and destruction and murders. Many of us find ourselves fearful because of what is going on around us. And because of what we experience and what we continue to experience, perhaps we can begin to imagine what it must have been like for the people of Israel that Jeremiah is writing about in our passage today. The people of Israel felt those same feelings, those same fears, that same pain, that same agony that we have felt because of these things that have happened in our worlds. The people of Israel, their city, their nation was destroyed. Their rulers and their religious leaders were taken off to another land. Our reading today for this first Sunday of Advent comes from the book of Jeremiah. That's not a book that we read very often in worship, but we read it today. We read it today because it speaks to this season of waiting, this time of Advent, this time when we are getting ready for the coming anew of the Christ child. But let me give you a little background. 600 years before Jesus was born, the people of Israel were carried off in exile to Babylon. 600 years before Jesus was born, the prophets had told them that if they didn't shape up, if they didn't live in justice and righteousness, they would experience a downfall. And that's certainly what happened. They were cut down by a brutal and wicked oppressor. Several decades before, the people of Israel under King David, come on in. The people of Israel under King David had experienced, they had experienced a wonderful time in their country and in their kingdom. Israel was a formidable political and military power. And the people still remembered those glory days. And they longed for their return. But their king was no more. And those glory days were just a dim memory. The city of Jerusalem was destroyed. The people were in exile. And then Jeremiah begins to speak. And it's at that moment, right there in the midst of their despair, right there when they are experiencing so much pain and heartache, that Jeremiah begins to talk. Jeremiah was a prophet. A prophet is someone who speaks on God's behalf. But Jeremiah was also a poet, and Jeremiah had an imagination and a deep sense of call to proclaim the promise of God's future. And even in destruction, even in the devastation and the loss, Jeremiah was there to speak a word of hope for the people of Israel. Because you see, the people were suffering. They were suffering. And Jerusalem and the temple were in ruins, and Jeremiah was not there to heap any more misery upon them. He offers them hope. He offers them hope. In fact, if you read this section of Jeremiah, you realize that his voice in this section of the book of Jeremiah takes a dramatic turn, and these chapters in Jeremiah are often called the book of comfort. This section of Jeremiah is often called the book of comfort because what Jeremiah is doing is offering words of comfort. And the people, they need this consolation. They need to have some hope and because they were suffering and dealing perhaps even with post-traumatic stress disorder because they had experienced such difficulty and such pain and heartache. Why look to the future if life holds so much pain? Why look to the future if life holds so much pain? I don't know about you, but I know for myself, and I know for at least some of you, there have been times in your life when you have experienced pain and heartache and misery. And when you find yourself in that place, hope often seems elusive. When you find your place in that deep, dark place, hope often seems elusive. And yet it is in that place where the people of Israel were, when they were just at their deepest and lowest point, that Jeremiah comes in and offers them hope. Jeremiah shares a promise of what is yet to be, and Jeremiah doesn't say that things might get better. Jeremiah doesn't say that things could be better. Jeremiah does not say that you need to be optimistic about the possibilities. Jeremiah says in the words of the New Revised Standard Version, the days are surely coming. The days are surely coming. You can count on it because God is making the promise. The days are surely coming. The days are surely coming, says the Lord, when I will fulfill the promise that I made to the house of Israel and the house of Judah. But what does that mean? What does Jeremiah mean by that? What will that day look like? Come on in, come on in. We missed you guys. Glad you're here. What will that day look like? It will not be a day of revenge. It will not be a day so that those who have suffered and who have experienced pain will be able to go and enact revenge on others. No. In reading various commentators about this particular passage, I was taken to a video clip of Robert F. Kennedy. Robert F. Kennedy was speaking to a crowd in Indianapolis, Indiana, on the night that Martin Luther King was shot and killed, Martin Luther King Jr. And Robert F. Kennedy received the message, and it was his role in that setting to share with the crowd that gathered, to share with them that Martin Luther King Jr. had been killed. And he shared it with a stunned and an anguished crowd. I'll give you the link to the video in the print version of the sermon, but it is believed that the words that he spoke that day to the people of Indianapolis helped to create a level of calm and helped to create a level of calm in that city when many other cities across the U.S. erupted into rioting and flames and violence. Kennedy spoke against the division and the hatred and the violence and the lawlessness that had the power to tear the nation apart. As he spoke to the people of Indianapolis, he shared with them, I've lost a brother. Of course, he was speaking of his brother, John F. Kennedy, who was assassinated. He said that he had lost a brother to violence and hatred. And then as he spoke about the pain of that loss, he lifted up for the people there in Indianapolis love and wisdom and compassion toward one another. And Robert F. Kennedy spoke of the need for justice toward those who still suffer within our country. Some of you know that he was assassinated not too long after that. He gave his own life. But his words on that particular day brought hope to the people of Indianapolis. Now let's fast forward to 2015. In recent days, we have seen terrorist attacks all across our world. Terrorist attacks that have been in cities across our world and even in our own country. And if you look at the people who did those horrible things, they run the gamut of all varieties of folk. Our world and our cities are in turmoil. We have seen hate. We have seen hate lived out. But we have also witnessed grace. We have witnessed the compassion of people who have come together, people who did not know one another, and who have cared for one another in the pain of those horrible and horrific situations. But how do we not seek revenge? How do we not seek revenge? How do we not respond with a feeling of justice toward those who still suffer? How do we respond with a feeling of justice toward those who still suffer and with those who may suffer in the future? How do we not inflict harm on innocent people? But most of all, how do we as God's people, how do we live in hope and not fear? How do we live in hope and not fear? When innocent children are murdered just a few blocks from this spot, how do we not hide and lock our doors? When the politicians stir up the frenzy of hate, how do we respond as the people of God rather than a people of prejudice and bigotry? Jeremiah talks about a day that is promised by God, a day that will be a day of justice and righteousness. It will be a day when the cities of ancient Israel and the cities of the world will not be ruined. Jeremiah is talking about Jerusalem, but Jeremiah is also talking about our cities. The cities of our own nation, not just New York City and Washington, D.C., but also Colorado Springs and Houston, Texas. Jeremiah is talking about us. Jeremiah says, the day is surely coming. The day is surely coming. The land will not be scarred by poverty, by violence and greed. It will not mean glittery nightlife and sports venues, but neighborhoods restored and healed and safe for people to live in and to be with one another. The day is surely coming when all of God's children, Jeremiah says, will live in peace. Everyone will have enough to eat and shelter and safety and the goods of the provided generosity of God. The one who is yet to come, Jeremiah says, the one that we are waiting for will bring justice and righteousness. And as we wait, we will begin to live our lives differently because we know that justice and righteousness will come. And we know that justice and righteousness will prevail. God will reign, and God's world will be renewed. That, my friends, is the hope of this holy season. That as we wait for God's justice and righteousness, we, as God's people, will be renewed as well. How many of you have seen the movie The Secret Garden? There's a book that movie is written, the book that was written that is the basis of that movie. The book is The Secret Garden by Francis Burnett. And in the scene, there's a boy named Dickon and his friend Mary who explore that wonderful garden. And if you go into the garden, it appears that many of the branches and the rose bushes are all dead. And over and over and over, you hear the word gray repeated over and over again. But Dickon takes out a knife and cuts into one branch. And what he finds there is not gray, but what he finds there is brownish green and life. And he assures Mary that deep inside of that shoot, that tree is full of life and promise and hope. My friends, that's what Jeremiah is talking about. Jeremiah is talking about a dead stump, which is exactly where God brings forth new life and hope and justice and righteousness to spring forth. From the cut off stump of David will come a righteous branch. And what appears dead will give birth to new life and new nationhood, a new nation and new beginning. To those who have lost so much, it seems so impossible. But yet what Jeremiah is saying is that out of that which seems dead will spring forth life. It seemed that everything in Israel was destroyed, but not its roots. There were still memories. There was still the history that the Hebrew people had with their God and whose name was too holy to speak. And that meant that there was still the possibility and the promise that out of that which seemed lifeless, new life would come. A righteous branch was coming, the prophet promised, one who would execute justice and righteousness. Yes, God's reign will once again bring justice and righteousness to the world around us. But during this holy season, that's where we come in, my friends. That's where we come in. For we are called to be the church of Jesus Christ. And a church that does what it's supposed to do is a church that lives and breathes God's justice and righteousness. Not our righteousness, but God's righteousness. We, my friends, are called to be a new shoot in this community. We are called to bring forth life and hope and promise no matter what things may look like on the outside. In the midst of loneliness and despair and poverty and depression and personal loneliness, we are called to be the church of Jesus Christ. And we are called to be God's justice and God's righteousness as we wait for the coming King. We are called to open our doors. We are called to open our doors and our hearts to all of God's children and offer them a place and a community where we can flame with God's guidance those little flames of hope into fires of justice and peace. We are called as God's people to offer the warmth of a spiritual home and to help grow the faith of those who choose to participate in the dream of God. Jeremiah reminds us that there is hope for peace. Jeremiah reminds us that there is hope for justice and righteousness in our world. And it is a day that is surely coming. Amen. I'll invite Reggie to invite the children to come up. We have several children who just arrived just in time for Reggie. So, can you guys come forward up here?
Just in time for Reggie.
Just in time for Reggie, yes.